Now for a look behind the headlines.
Hello and welcome to this month's episode of Don't Shout at the Telly with me, your host, Lalana Keith. Joining me tonight on the sofa I have Naomi, who likes swimming, Miranda, who is an unemployed graduate but prefers to describe herself as freelance, Salma, who is an A-level student studying at Hackney College, Joe, a librarian from Camberwell, and Saleha from Hackney, who wants to change the world. Amazing. So who'd like to get us started tonight?
I will.
Yeah?
That's good.
Naomi?
So this week I've chosen an article which is in The Guardian. So this Catholic school, they're defending the ban that they've placed on administering the cervical cancer jab within the school premises. I just wanted to say that I think it's crazy that they're banning this vaccine. I think it's really great that we have a vaccine now that we are able to, that has been through these rigorous trials and testing, that is showing to be able to prevent cancer. I think they said something like if this vaccine, or all girls are allowed to be vaccinated, it can reduce like 75% of deaths. I think this is a great thing to have. But this Catholic school, they've banned the administration of this vaccine on the school premises, and the reasons that they give are completely crazy and they're not justified. One of these reasons that they give is that they don't feel that it's right that this vaccine should be allowed to be given to students on school premises. But this is crazy because we have vaccines given to us in school premises all the time, such as our MMR top-ups for tuberculosis and meningitis. I think evidence has shown that also if you do give vaccines within schools, then you're more likely to have a greater uptake of the vaccine, whereas compared to studies where vaccines have to be arranged by parents, like it take all that hassle involved in like actually the parent getting their child going to their GP, and that it sort of limits the uptake of the vaccine. So they've shown that this will, by the school banning the administration of the cervical cancer jab on the school premises, which will reduce the number of girls who can take the vaccine, and also will put them at greater risk of contracting this virus later on in their life. Another reason that this school is banning the vaccine is also because of the side effects which are associated with the vaccine. Some of the side effects include dizziness and fainting, but I think these are such small side effects, compared with the benefits of the vaccine, which is shown to prevent girls contracting HPV virus, which leads to cervical cancer.
It's just a complete no-brainer. I can't believe, what reason they have for this.
I mean, it wouldn't surprise me if this was actually really a discussion about how the people who run that Catholic school feel the girls ought to behave, in terms of sort of sexual morality. And I think that's just completely contemptible, because it's essentially holding the threat of cancer as a kind of condition, like you have to behave, otherwise, you might get this terrible disease, or, to question it in return. I mean, like, the great thing about this vaccine is that women can now, women will be able to, in the future, make their own decisions about their sex lives without having to think about medical consequences as one of the issues involved.
Joe, what have you been reading about this week?
Well, I've been reading the Financial Times, which have hired Bono as their blogger to report on the Millennium Development Conference. I mean, Bono of all people. And in between his kind of self-indulgent waffling about hobnobbing the heads of state and kind of his self-congratulation in general, he's been talking about, among other things, the campaign called Malaria No More, which is, on the face of it, like a very worthy and important movement to eradicate malaria. But then when you drill down into it a little bit further, you see that one of their main strategy for reducing malaria incidence is by using bed nets and kind of sending them out to people in Africa who are most at risk for disease, which is everybody, and backing up with treatments, kind of anti-malarial drugs, which are, I don't know if you know much about it, but they're extremely kind of unpleasant drugs with really severe side effects, so surely prevention is the better measure. And you might think that bed nets would cover that, but it's not the case that malaria mosquitoes only bite people when they're asleep in bed. I mean, that seems to suggest that Africans will have to just stay inside these bed nets now for their entire lives. I mean,
a little net bubble.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, like wander around in space and turn outside as the next step of the solution or something. I mean, what I find really nauseating about this is the fact that in America and in Europe, malaria also used to be endemic, but we've wiped it out. the kind of really large-scale eradication strategies which involve pesticides like DDT, which is banned in America now they've actually got rid of malaria, and which there was for a long time a World Health Organization kind of health warning against, and strong recommendation we shouldn't use it because of its alleged environmental effects, which are pretty baseless, because now the World Health Organization actually retracted that statement and said actually it's fine to use DDT now. But what gets me as well is that despite this fact, and despite the fact that DDT is proven to be effective, a lot of African countries aren't empowered to use it, because to do so would require a lot of investment, because these kind of campaigns to eradicate diseases are very expensive to implement. And so they need a lot of aid, but the aid agencies are quite often have this environmentalist agenda, and they say, we'll give you this aid to fight malaria, but it has to be spent on bed nets, which is not the effective strategy. And this idea that Africans are only able to sort of, at best, control the disease or hide from it. They can't go out and say, we're going to change the environment, we're going to clear swamps, we're going to spray DDT everywhere, and we're going to eradicate this disease like you did in the West. It would be a lot harder to get rid of malaria entirely in Africa, where it's much more sort of entrenched and much more severely endemic than it ever was in the USA and Europe. But just because it's harder doesn't mean it's impossible. And there's a lot of debate about whether it is possible to get rid of malaria, and it's been proven to be possible. So I don't know why there's no political will. That's the only obstacle to it. No political will to take firm steps to eradicate the disease.
Definitely.
Yeah, and also, I mean, a very strange logic, which I think you pointed out. I mean, mosquitoes, you know, they come out after dusk, and I mean, who goes to sleep after dusk? So do you go into your bed net after dusk or something?
Yeah, I think exactly.
And I mean, another thing I was thinking was, is it true that there's a place in India, which is the only place now that is making DDT, and they've had a lot of problems with sort of the green campaigners and everything.
No, I read that. I read about that actually. Greenpeace are typically hassling to shut it down. I think there's actually some DDT production in China on a low scale for internal programs, but nowhere else in the world produces it or exports it or imports it without insane amounts of hassle from Greenpeace, because apparently we have to put the wildlife first. Potential environmental benefits environmental impacts have to outweigh the very real fact that millions of people are dying of malaria. Yeah.
Not as important, really, honestly.
Clearly not.
Okay, great. Who would... Saleha, what have you been reading? What's grabbed your goat?
Well, I've been reading an online article from BBC News Online, and the title is Foreign National ID Card Unveiled. From late November of this year, foreign nationals such as, which includes foreign students who come here to study, or marriage visa holders who come here through marriage, they will obligatorily have to have ID cards. Now, I think you should all sort of nod with me in agreement when I tell you what the Home Secretary Jackie Smith said about how positive a move this is of the government. She said, well, it's actually very good because it easily and securely will enable them to prove their identity. I mean, you know, why do you want to be here and then you have to, like, prove yourself, I am who I am, you know, that sort of thing. I mean, I can go on and on till the cows go home about, you know, what's wrong with ID cards. From a civil liberties perspective, you know, the erosion of this idea that innocent until proven guilty. I can talk about it from, you know, they say that ID cards are like this, it helps against terrorism, you know, it combats terrorism. I mean, in Spain they've had ID cards, they've been mandatory for a very long time, but that didn't prevent the Madrid bombing. So, you know, and not to mention the fact that we're already one of the most surveillance societies in the world, with our CCTV cameras, our CRB checks, our passports and border controls. I mean, you know, we can go on and on with that as well, can't we? It's quite telling, actually, that when the government made this proposal known, the UK Border Agency said, they actually said this, yeah, this is a sub-quote, that the reason that foreign nationals are going to have these ID cards is because they are the ones who are at most risk of abusing immigration controls. They've got this long-term plan as well, that where first it's going to be foreign nationals, and then it's going to be people who are in high-risk jobs, so people at airports and things like that, who are in late 2009, they will have to have ID cards as well. And then by 2010, 16-year-olds will be issued ID cards, so youngsters, the youth.
They're obviously all criminal, aren't they?
Exactly. So you tackle one criminal group by one, basically, and then they're hoping by 2012, around that time, they're gonna 2011, 2012, they're gonna roll out the ID card system for everyone, so people can voluntarily apply for these ID cards. Telly, for one, I'm not going to voluntarily apply for this whenever it comes out,
Everybody's going to want one, the latest phase.
Oh, exactly. You know everyone's going to want one. It's going to be the latest trend by then. I mean, I love immigration, and it's a fantastic thing. It's a transformative act, and it's already been, everything around it has been hysterical in our press and everything, and this is just like rubber stamping. Yes, they're criminals, and for me personally, I think it's completely ridiculous. And I'd rather, I'd rather go by trust, basically. That's what I would say.
Definitely. What else have you found ridiculous this week?
Well, one of the things that I did think seemed a little strange was this debate about creationism that's been brought about by a talk that Professor Michael Rees did. He's the Director of Education at the Royal Society, well he was, but he gave this speech discussing where the role of creationism should be in education system in Britain. And for this, the Royal Society forced him to resign because they felt that it was undermining their values, which seems rather strange, as he was actually trying to enforce kind of evolution as what should be taught in schools, and he was trying to make a good point to kind of include this in a debate. I think this whole thing raises two main issues. It's firstly whether the Royal Society were right for forcing him to resign, and secondly, the wider debate of religion and science and kind of that battle and how it's changing in modern society. With the Royal Society, their motto is on the word of no one, and they base everything on evidence and not opinion, and they don't go on anyone's authority. It's all based on scientific evidence. So even for them even to consider debating creationism or even to raise it as an issue is undermining their values and apparently everything that they stand for, which is why that they then forced Professor Rees to resign. But what's the problem is that Rees was actually taken completely out of context. What he was doing was strengthening evolutionary teaching in schools and strengthening science. The quote that was always given in all the papers was that creationism is best seen by science teachers not as a misconception but as a worldview. And everyone said that therefore he was saying that creationism was equal to science. When actually what he was saying is when a child raises their hand when they're 11, 12 and they say, but my parents or my church or they've told me that Adam and Eve started the world and that God started the world, that the teacher doesn't just go, oh, be quiet, you don't know what you're talking about. The idea is that you can enter this into debate and that evolution needs to be taught as something that is scientifically based as opposed to creation which isn't scientifically based. And the fact that the Royal Society have forced someone to resign based on out-of-context quotes seems so weak and submissive. It seems completely ridiculous that they would give in to this when they're such a kind of strong authority.
No, absolutely. They didn't stand their ground. They went straight to like they couldn't defend themselves or anything. Bit weak.
I think it doesn't do any good to resort to censorship as a way to make sure your argument remains unchallenged. It just never works.
It's down to that, isn't it? Gosh.
I've been reading an article on Mayor Considers Island Airport, which basically is about the mayor. He has actually suggested that an airport on an artificial island in the Thames estuary could be, the answer to overcrowding in Heathrow. And I actually think that, is a wonderful, great idea. The UK does need a far better air traffic system as at Heathrow. And with the job opportunities, Heathrow already supports like 170,000 jobs, and with the airport, airport actually being put into this artificial land, artificial island, it will be like great for job opportunities and stuff like that. But there is a criticism of the plan. It's like and one of the criticism is about the air noise pollution and the level of noise. But actually, the expansion. I've actually researched and I've found out that the expansion wouldn't breach the European Union's air pollution limits and the government's own noise limits, and this actually has been said by the government officials. and by having this this expansion of the Heathrow airport, it would be a absolutely great gateway, and London does need this. That's what I think, actually.
Yeah. It sounds like there's an airport in Japan, I think it's in Osaka, where it's on the sea.
Yeah.
And so it doesn't disturb anyone like in the area because it's on the sea, so it gets rid of all of those problems that there were with Heathrow Terminal 5 about planes flying over people's houses and stuff if you do it in an area of water. I think it's a really clever idea.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
I'm quite surprised actually that Boris Johnson's come up with such a kind of dynamic policy. It's quite sad that he's sort of pandered to the environmentalist objections to the original sort of Heathrow expansion. I think they're probably still going to object that, I don't know, there's wildlife in the estuary of some description.
So, okay, well...
what about you?
Oh.
Have you had anything?
Well, actually, yes, there's been something which has really made me angry this week that unfortunately we don't have time to discuss here properly, but it's this new green paper that the government is trying to put forward at the moment, which in my view seems to be just reinforcing all absolutely outdated, ridiculous ideas that all the long-term unemployed are lazy, good-for-nothing slobs, because they're forcing them into volunteer work. I don't know if anybody else has read about this. It will be mandatory for the long-term unemployed to volunteer. Now, mandatory volunteer work aside, obviously a slight issue, I think this is a really, really important thing that Worldwrite should discuss and try and actually challenge whilst there's still time, whilst this paper is still being discussed, because it's just outrageous.
Definitely.
It sounds like slave labour, making people work for their job seekers' allowance.
Or just harking back to Victorian times, with the poor law and the workhouses and all of that. Let's bring that back, man.
How are they taking this seriously? We can't. But anyway, we'll have to discuss it another time, I think, because that's all we've got time for tonight. You've been watching Don't Shout at the Telly with your host, Lilana Keith. Don't just shout at the telly. Let us know what you think on Viewers Bite Back on our website. We look forward to hearing from you.